Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Streaming Alchemy Show. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to be doing a follow up from last week's part one on production graphics. What will be different in this show is we're going to actually look at how to take the graphics we designed using Photoshop in last week's episode and look at how to convert those into graphics we can actually use as production assets, and then how we can control those graphics in a live production. So before we get started, I want to remind everybody that we absolutely would welcome you to call in and join us here on the show. So if you can connect to the link here, and I think we also put the link in the show notes below where you're probably watching the show, uh, it should be pretty easy for you to come in and join us. But if you can't call in, please share your comments, ask questions. We love to have the engagement from you. All right. So, if you remember on last week's show, we looked at a whole range of different types of graphics that are part of the production landscape. But for today's show, we're going to just look at one graphic in particular. So, if we can switch over to a shot which shows the desktop here, this is a full frame graphic that we put together last week. It's been cleaned up a little bit that has a range of elements here that are really critical to, what we're going to cover today. So if you look at this as it's really just a series of layers. We have an image of the player, the back drop behind the player, something to separate them from the background, which is just the stadium image we have here. We then have a background element behind their name and their position. We have a background element that comes in behind text, which describes something about this player. And then we also have something that I added new here because I think it's going to be important for the types of real world applications you may have to run into. Is we have a sponsorship logo here along with a URL and a sort of sponsor slogan that can go along with the graphic that you may want to put up. So this would be the case where you want to highlight a player, but you have a local pizza parlor or some other local organization covering the cost and supporting you. This is the place where you could put their logo and combine it all. So what we want to do in today's show is to take all of these elements that you see here, bring them into something called LiveText, which is a NewTek product which lets you convert graphic elements into an XML based descriptor, which describes how all these elements lay on top of each other and how they get populated, what information goes in them. And from there, we're going to take and bring that into this production here and show you how to manipulate what you actually see on screen after you've gone out of LiveText. So just to sort of refresh based on what we've talked about here, here are the elements that we're actually going to be assembling using LiveText. So we have the player, which would just be a placeholder. There are two backgrounds, one for text and one behind the player. We're going to have a background element that sits behind the title, the position, and the name of the player. And then again, the sponsor logo. So these are the graphic elements that we have that we're going to assemble. And of course, we have the background element, which, is the stadium that we showed in the last image we had up here. So get started. Let me jump into LiveText here. So LiveText is actually a pretty straightforward interface for assembling all the elements that go to make up a production graphic. So it allows you to take and import elements. So I can go in and say, I want to add files. And this will let me go out and let me see if I can do all this here. Yeah. So of course, when you want to do something live, it always it always gives you an issue. So let me actually just shut this down here, and I will switch back in. So there we go. Uh, all right, let's see if this worked any better. So I think I can get to what I want to here. Okay. So sorry about this. We just have to run through here. So this would be all the way down here. So I think I'm here. And then I have show assets. Sorry about this. This is stuff we all had set in advance. And so let me see if I have all of these elements here. Let me just do this. Let me just do this a different way. I probably have everything I need right over here. So if I can just go to the desktop and go to show assets. Let me see. Okay, so we're going to work from here. So sorry about that, but let's pick this up. So I'm going to bring in first we're going to bring in the background image, and in fact, I'm probably going to bring in all of these. Let me see if I can just grab them all in one thing, and we'll open them up. Okay, so what I actually brought in here, that's probably an image too much here, but so I have, let's see, yeah, we'll get rid of these two guys here and delete that. Oh, I'm not doing good today. I'm sorry about this. So let me bring these in again. So add the file, go to my computer. Desktop and show assets. And we'll show them here. So if I just bring in the background, this, player background, and the sponsor. We'll bring this in and let's see how this will work. All right, so here we go. So what I've done here now is I've imported all of the different graphic elements that we had from Photoshop. And now, just like in Photoshop, I'm going to be able to take these assets and convert them into individual layers. So if you look in LiveText, you see there's a page with layers that are all enumerated, how I want to set them up. So if I go and say, I actually want to have the player placeholder all the way on top. Okay. So we'll move this down and place that on top. So I can now put text in. So I have the player placeholder, and I'll grab him and move him over. Oh, it's the wrong one. So move him over here. We will take the background that we had for the player, and he can sit now behind the player placeholder. Okay. And we'll slide him over here behind the player. I now have the sponsor logo, which we'll bring here. And this is the background we want to have for the player's name and position. So in LiveText, what we really have is just another layered graphics package that allows me to manipulate these layers. But these layers now are all pre-described. This isn't going to be a Photoshop style thing where I can go in and edit these in any appreciable way. I really can just go in and assemble these things as individual components. Now, there's something I want you to notice down here, because it isn't really that obvious when you look at the documentation. What you end up with is you want to be able later on to change this image. So the football player image we have is the placeholder. What you have to do in LiveText is actually name that image with an underscore placeholder in the name of the image. That way, when it actually is brought into your TriCaster, you'll know that the TriCaster will know that that's a swappable image and I can replace it with another one, because that's going to be important to how we actually manipulate these images going forward. So I have the same thing in two places. So I have it for the player image, and I also have it for the sponsor image because we probably want to do things. So now that we actually have these things in place, let's go back and add some text here. So let me see, I'll delete this guy because we don't need him. We'll go in here and we'll add text for the name. So we'll go player name. So all I'm doing here is I select the text tool and I click somewhere in the image area where I want it. And I can now start to manipulate this. So in text and drawing, I can go and say, gee, I like something big. So let's do something like impact, which is let's see. Yeah, so impact is a nice big font, and we're going to bump the font size up to something like, yeah, that's good. And then we're just going to go and we're going to move this into where we need this. So what I'm doing here with all of these is, let's see, maybe we'll change the, make this a little darker. So I'll go in here and we'll make this black. So I'm not going to go through every element of this, but I think the important thing to see here is that you are now taking what were discrete images in as layers in Photoshop, and you're assembling them now in LiveText. And what LiveText is really doing, it's not a graphics package per se. It's taking these graphic elements and it's letting you combine them as a layout and as a stacking order, and it's creating an XML file out of this that can then be used by the TriCaster to render these things in a live production. So just, very quickly, we could do this. We can add a player name, and so let's go here and we'll add the player position. And so now I have these things here and we move them around, change the size. Again, all the basic stuff that we looked at before, and I can move this around to get this to look the way I want. So I get to change text and I add graphics in here. So what I would then do is you can actually take and you can save this as a project, or you can just export the current page. And so the TriCaster could work with either one. So what I'd actually like to do here is, let me see, what I'll do is I'll open one that is, we finished completely, and see if I have that available here. So we'll discard this because I have it all here. And let me see if I can just open up this here. Actually, let me go out. We'll skip this and let me jump over to the TriCaster right now, and I'll show you what we'd actually do as so we'll discard this. So if we do this, let me go over and open up a NDI. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to connect to the TriCaster to multi-viewer 1. Okay. And I'm going to put on KVM. So here we go. What I've done now is I've KVM'd into the TriCaster. And as you see down here, I've actually loaded that graphic element into a placeholder here. And I'm going to just do this in the buffer right next to it so we can see me do this from scratch. So I have this as an XML CG file. And so I'm going to open this up. And now I can go in and edit what's in here. So if you see here on the TriCaster, all of these areas are now set up as text blocks or graphic elements that are basically assembled directly based on what we had seen in the LiveText demo. So one of the cool things, though, with TriCaster is something called Datalink. Now, with Datalink, you're able to take and bind data that is sitting in a file into the graphic that you want to display on screen. And the way you do that, I will come in here and let me go. I want to change this and we'll do %. And since we have these set up as keys, this is going to be the player name. So if you see, as you look down here on this list here, you'll actually see all the different data link elements I have available that I can use to populate this graphic here. So in this case, we're going to put player name, and I go here, and that's what we have sitting in a basic file. Over here, I can do the same thing with key and player position. And so that will go in there now. Coming over here, do the same thing for here, and we call this the player factoid. So if I come here and say this is the little fact about the player that we want to share, now again, all the text that was in there is getting changed out. So the same holds true for the graphics. And let me talk about that for a second. So I'm going to say I want you to show the full image for the graphic. And now I look at the graphic properties. And right now, this is showing the actual file name, which, as I said, it has to be labeled with the underscore placeholder. But what you can also do is you can actually say, I actually want to show you a graphic. And what Datalink is going to have in it is the actual URI, the path to the graphic that you want to place in here. So if I go here, this is called add image. So setting this up now, there's no image set up here, and we'll jump into that in a moment. But I can do the exact same thing with the football player. I'll say I want to show all of the image, and for this I want to use let's see, key, and I want to use player image. And so boom, it's the same image that we had there before. So this basically is all I need to do. I take the graphic layers from Photoshop, bring them into LiveText, then export that as a CG XML file, and from there, bring that into the TriCaster and tell it where I want it to get the information from. So if we look at how we did this over here, what you actually see now is this is the fully done graphic where it has all of the elements now that were picked out. And so you don't see anything on the edge because we didn't place any add information in there. But what we now have the ability to do is to use Datalink and that graphic, that's XML-based graphic that we set up in the TriCaster to swap the images, swap the sponsors, and do all that dynamically as we're live. So let me jump out of here because I don't think the guys in the control room ever feel good when I'm touching the TriCaster during a live show. So let me get out of there. And what I think probably is a good next step is let me show you how we set this up so it can work with Datalink. So at its core, if I just put this up here, we'll hide this. So at its core, Datalink is a file that uses a file that has an XML structure inside it, which points to each one of the elements that we highlighted in when we were setting this up in the TriCaster, and says what's the value you should put in there. So it's very simple. But the way we want to use this during a production is we want to have a structure where we can easily change that Datalink file that's being read and swap what's in it. And that, since Datalink is dynamic, that will force the graphics that are on screen to change. So if I open this up, these are all the graphic assets that we have. But the way we're organizing this now is we're taking two different folders that we're setting up on a system here, which is just a system that's right on the network here. And we're having one folder that we're going to place all the Datalink information we'll need for ads, and another folder where we're going to do the Datalink information we want for each of the players. And now in this case, we set it up as Team A. There could be multiple teams in this. But if I open this as a directory, and hopefully you'll be able to see this because I know it could be a little small here. I have everything set up for different players here. And if I open this up one more level down, here's what you get. At the top, we have a PNG file, which is an image of the player that we want to show in the graphic. Then we have an XML file, which describes all the data that relates to that player. So if I come in and open this, you'll see a full XML description behind that. And then I have a batch file, or the bat file traditionally in Windows world, that allows me to copy all of the elements in this directory over to, on the TriCaster, what's called a Datalink watch folder. And this is where Datalink on the TriCaster is looking to read the information it uses for a graphic. So let me go and just open up the player facts here. And what you can see is basically an XML description of everything we just talked about. So these were all of the key things that we saw. If you remember when I typed %key and then you saw all the different things. So I typed for player image, for their name, their position. So what you see here is the XML that Datalink uses. So the player image is being taken off of a drive, an image that we stored on a drive in the network here in the studio. The name is in here as text embedded here. And again, anybody that's worked on the techie side of configuring things will recognize these types of structures in an XML setting. And so all of this information is here. So what we're doing with this is we're copying it into a Datalink folder. So what's probably a good way to do now is let's actually switch over to the buffer, which we have this graphic in, and we'll go through and show you basically how this would look as I change information in it. So I had players set up. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to hit player 1 here. And what you'll see now is we populate everything in there with the information from that XML file, and it's pulling the graphic where we told it to get the graphic from, and it's pulling all the text right out of the XML file. And I can do this just here at a touch of a button to switch between the different graphic sets we have here. So I can sort of go back to our blank default one. So the other thing that we can do, if you remember, we had something for ads in this as well. So I actually have buttons that can let me pull up sponsor ads. So I can change all these things separately as we're going through. And I can change the ad that's there for another sponsor if I want, or pull the sponsor ad down. So what you're seeing here is all being run off of that one graphic template we put together between the different assets we disassembled in Photoshop and reassembled in LiveText, and the data that we have populating them. So this is really powerful because we're just looking at what is, in essence, a single graphic element in the TriCaster. But we're using data dynamically swapped in and out to populate it. So how are we doing that? Well, we're doing that using a Stream Deck here. So if you look along here, here's where I have all the player buttons. So when I swap, I am simply pressing a button that relates to that player. And if I want to add or take off a sponsor, again, the same thing. I'm just touching buttons that have this information sort of pre-baked. So let's take a look here at what I did on the Stream Deck. So open this up. And what you see here is basically, I opened up the Stream Deck application. And what you see on the Stream Deck application, let's switch to the application here. Yep. So what you see on this is basically a mirror of what we had on the Stream Deck itself. So these are the two sponsor ads that I had and something to pull them down. And these were all the player information. So what am I doing here? So let's just take a look at player 4. So I just gave it a text title down here, player 4. It's a little hard to see, I know. And what I'm telling it to do is to run that batch file that we have, which copies all of the data into another directory. So, but when you look at this, what I'm actually doing is I'm going into each directory and setting this up. So I am telling my Stream Deck to go into this directory and run this batch file, which copies all the things over. And to all I do beyond that is I just set the graphic I want from a file, which is basically just a file with all the player images in it. And I now have set up something that easily allows you to switch between all the different player images now with the touch of a single button. So very, very quick, very easy. You have images on here now. So it's very easy if you're looking at this to see the image of who the player is. You could just put big numbers if you just wanted to track players by numbers. And as we've talked about before with Stream Deck, the great thing here is you can have directory structure, sort of nested buttons on Stream Deck. So you could have button for team A, button for team B, click that button and then have all the players show up for each one of those teams, or do things for the defense or the offense, wherever you want it. So what this allows you to do is use a very simple mechanism, basically copying files around, to do something very sophisticated using the Stream Deck. So again, this gives you a full production control mechanism for all of these types of graphics. And what's great is everything that's in that XML file doesn't have to be used on one particular graphic. So if you're talking about a particular player, you could populate everything about that player in the Datalink XML file for that player that you copy over, and then use different graphics to pick up different pieces of that information. So this means that using the same button mechanism, you could swap different graphics for that player. One, you could have a whole section with statistics for them. You could have a whole section with past performance, with historical facts that are more than just a sort of little factoid thing we showed. So this can give you now the ability not just to control one graphic, but to control the core data that's being used to drive all your graphics on screen at a given time. So, this means that you can have a lower third, a sidebar, a full screen graphic, and all you're doing is you pick what graphic element you want to display, and you pick the player you want to display it for. Again, very, very quick and easy mechanism that is extremely powerful as you start to think about it. Now, if I were going to be doing this in a professional production space, I mean, this is one way you certainly could do it. But if I were doing this week after week, it could be difficult to manage over time. What you can also do with Datalink, and one of the things that makes it so compellingly powerful, is you can drive information out of a database. So I could do something here where I just have a large database that's actually generating this file. And again, because it's XML, I don't even have to use anything special to do this. Any database could really render an XML file based on a query. So it gives you another level down if you're looking for something that could expand to working with the whole league, if you cover conference games, anything like that. That's another way you can do this. So you just organize the images that you want in a directory structure, and then all the other data information is being driven out of a database. So same basic concept that we covered here, but a very different approach to how you'd actually manage that at scale. So that's it for today. Hopefully, I apologize for the issues we had in the beginning with LiveText, but hopefully, this was useful. It gave you some way to think about the graphics that you may be using in your productions. As we mentioned before, creating these types of cutout graphics is really easy. A simple green screen and your phone camera, and then somebody working in Photoshop to cut out the green background is all you'd need, and you could store a whole library of these. So this could work as well for a little league team, a high school team, or professional teams that you may be covering here. Or it could work for executive photos. So you start to think about this beyond just what you would want to do in sports, but think more broadly of how you could handle things. So this in the non-sports space, this could easily be something where you have signage that you're driving on the sides of a podium where you want to highlight the speaker and put up facts about them. This is a perfect example of the types of ways you can do that, where you can drive, what gets shown on there for any given speaker. So again, very flexible general tool that has a lot of applications. All right. So thank you very much for sticking around. Hopefully, we covered everything you need, but if you have any questions, please ask them in the comments. We're also going to be staying after the show. We'll go dark, and then we'll come back in to sort of have a more informal place where anybody with questions or anybody wants to join us, can feel free to come on. But if you're not going to come to there, it'll be great to see you next week, because on next week's show, we're going to be talking about some thoughts on set design. Getting a set right is not an easy process. It involves not just the physical set, but cameras, lighting, lens choice, a lot of different things for the placement of objects in a set. So hopefully that will be an interesting conversation for us to have next week. So if you're not going to be part of the after show, thank you again, and I'll see you next week. If not, if you're going to join us, I'll see you in a few minutes. We'll go dark. Take care. Thank you. Hi, everybody. We're back. So hopefully this was interesting for you guys. I know that everything I've talked about so far has really just been around static graphics, but what you probably will see, while there may be dynamic elements that people show in a lot of the graphics that are on professional sports or other professional environments, the core of it is still mostly static graphics. So it's not all the things that we talk about here, I think will still apply, as you do things, even with motion graphics. And that's something, that I'm definitely looking forward to covering in a future episode. There's a lot more to handling things on the motion graphic side, but this is definitely something that we found, as we were going through this, we found it to be pretty interesting that you have this type of flexibility. And when we were looking at what is being produced, we saw that a lot of the stuff that you can do with layering. So you could layer dynamic elements on top of static elements, or you can do static elements that are put into motion. That is something that actually I didn't go into, but LiveText can actually handle that as well. So you can take and move elements on screen over a period of time. So it could give you things that would give you something like the parallax effect, where you have two different things at different motion at different depths that people can then perceive as some sort of motion in depth. So that could definitely be an interesting use case in all of this. So yeah, John was asking if this is anything like Title Alive. Yes, I mean there is a graphics package for Titler inside of Wirecast. There's also a graphics package inside of vMix, which are probably two of the most popular professional streaming apps that are out there. I am not an expert on Wirecast, so I mean I just want to qualify that. I am not sure how Wirecast would work with dynamically changing the data. I do know that Wirecast lets you build these things as essentially layered shots that you have that you can then put all the title information into, and work with those as a sequence across a row where you can select which shot am I going to pick. So I know that's definitely in there as a general capability. I have to look up more about how you would do that if you were thinking about doing this dynamically like we showed here. But the same basic mechanism could work for what we're talking about. So in this case, this could be something where I use the player buttons to pick which shot I want to take in doing something with Wirecast and their titler app. So there are different ways to do this. Uh, this is clearly an area that has a lot of depth to it, and there are probably lots of different ways to achieve the same things here. But by and large, all of the major production streaming applications have some way to bring these types of graphics, uh, on air as a part of the standard production workflow. So definitely something that that could be interesting to explore in future shows. But talking about different things with say Wirecast and vMix, for example, to see if we could do some of these same things that I set up here on the TriCaster. The other area, though, that when we talk about motion graphics that we didn't touch on, and will be another show definitely, is on the TriCaster, they are now leveraging Adobe's Creative Suite to do different types of graphics work. And so that's something that, definitely has, all of the motion elements in it. Oh, Gabe, thank you for joining us. Thanks for chiming in here. Yeah. New Blue's Title Alive Complete and Broadcast. We actually have Complete. We've been looking at bringing that in. Uh, New Blue and Wirecast have a great relationship, so I know they've been bundling elements of New Blue's titler software into different packages they offer. But New Blue Titler Live is like way beyond. Uh, so it definitely has things for not just graphics, not just motion. It's all it can be all NDI driven. It can also work with things like polls. So you can use it to have if people type, A, B, C, or D in comments to bring that in and display the results of polls that you hold. So New Blue definitely is a big step up, and it's funny that John just mentioned that he think that means he's going to need to upgrade from Express, but actually I think there's a lot you can do in Express itself. So I wouldn't just be ready to ditch Express quite yet. I think there's a lot of mileage in there. And just in general, New Blue's been doing this for quite a while. So this is their approach is very much in line with the types of things you see in professional graphics tools. The one thing I will say, and Gabe, I'll get to your comment in 1 second, is that when you use New Blue, you actually need somebody uh, operating that in a more dedicated way. There's a lot of different elements to it, and the interface really requires attention. But if you have that person, New Blue, broadcast and complete, one is just different numbers of graphic channels you can have. Both of those can go, as far into the professional space as you want. So, Gabe, you had something. So yes, they have a great deal going on. So, yeah, I mean, I saw some of the stuff. We did an upgrade to complete as well as part of one of the trade-in deals last year, and we've upgraded along the way. Definitely, right. If you have that interest and you really want to focus more on the graphics in your production, New Blue is great that way. And sort of to Gabe and John's point, this works with Wirecast. It works with basically anything. So unlike LiveText, which I use for today's show, that's TriCaster only. But these tools will work with anything downstream that can take an NDI feed and embedded alpha. So sort of pre-multiplied alpha, which means that you can cut things out in the video stream that's being sent. Then you're good. So you can work with everything from OBS on the free side up through TriCaster, even though there are other things on the TriCaster for this and other things on vMix for this. You get to cover the whole ground with this. And if you're training somebody and you want to use a tool that has that flexibility across platform, New Blue is definitely the way to go. So we really like it. It's just getting it into our workflow is going to take us a little bit longer. But definitely love it as a product. All right then. So if there are any other questions, sort of going once, going twice. All right then. So uh, thanks again for joining me as part of the after show. I appreciate you making the time on your Fridays to do this. So, like we mentioned before, our show next week is going to be on some thoughts about set design. And the reason we're talking about this, so you stayed around for the after show, so you get a little tidbit here, uh, is we are in the process of rebuilding our set here. So it's early stages, so there's a lot of physical things, uh, so that will take a while. But Gabe, yeah, I agree. Stream decks, love stream decks. you know, Driving things. If you have everything set up and can drive it from a stream deck, I'd absolutely use that anytime. It is so powerful, and you combine it with something like Companion, you can do a lot more. But that's we can go into deeper dives on that for another show. But definitely, Stream Deck makes it a lot easier to do that while you're switching a show. But so we're going to be doing a new set build, as I mentioned, and this is something I want to be able to share with everybody. So I want to, in next week's show, we're going to give you some general ideas about set design that we've been you know, coming to find out as we've researched it. But I'm also going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we're planning to do and how this new set may look. And more than anything, I'm looking for people's feedback. This show and how we do this is really driven by whatever you guys are looking for as we move forward. So our thoughts are going to definitely be influenced by your feedback as to how we should organize the set, some of the things we were thinking about adding to it, and some of the workflow changes that's going to entail. So that stuff we'll all share next week. So glad you got to hang around and that I could share that with you. But until next week, then, I'll see you all. Take care.